Welcome to Cheshire Quilters Guild 2019 Block of the Month, Cat Den Mountain Quilts BOM. This is month 12, the finish. First thing we need to do is to sew together the fabric B strips to make the inner border. And to do that, sew them on the diagonal, I'd like to make use of a ruler like this one that has the two 45-degree lines that intersect at the 1/4 inch mark. And I lay that one of the 45-degree lines on the bottom of my strips, and I usually just scooch it down just a little tiny bit, and then I can trim off the end, and I now have the ends trimmed at the 45 so I can easily piece them together. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these together and cut the 4 border strips that I need in the size that I need. Next up, we're going to make the corner units for the border, and we're going to do that by taking our fabric A to a narrow strip and fabric I narrow strip, and we're going to sew them together to make a strip set. Now that we have our strips set, we cut the segment the size needed. Alright, now that we've cut the segments, all we need to do is match up a pair of these and stitch 1/4 inch seam to make 4 patches. And after I stitch it, I'm going to furl the seams on the back. So let me do that, and then I'll come back and show you what else we need to do to make the corner units. So I've got my 4 patches sewn. And just a reminder, since these are to the blue, the other seams to furl are going to go toward the white. So this one's going to come down and this one's going to come up. And that's going to pop that little, so we have a little 4 patch on the back. That's how we need to furl the seams on these 4 patches. So let me go finish that up, and I'll meet you back here for the next step. So here's my 4 patches, and you need to orient them so that the fabric I is in the upper left corner, like not like this, but like this. And then you're going to put the shorter fabric C rectangles on this top edge and press toward that. So let me do that, and I'll come back, and then we'll see where we need to put the longer rectangles. So I have the short rectangles sewn on and pressed to them, and now we're going to put the long rectangles on the right hand side. Now it's very important that you end up with a fabric A square in this corner. If not, then the border isn't going to go together correctly. So check and make sure you end up with a white or your fabric A in the corner of your between the 2 fabric C rectangles. And there's our border corner units, all 4 of them made. So now we can move on to the next part of the border. We're now going to sew 4 strip sets of 5 strips each, alternating between fabrics I and A. And we're going to make 2 strip sets that look like this, A, and we're going to make 2 strip sets that look like this, I, A, I, A, I. So we're going to make 2 of each combination, and when we press, we're always going to press toward fabric I. So here's my strip sets finished. I have 2 with I, and 2 with A. So now we're just going to cut these up into segments that are 2 1/8, and we need 28 of each. We need 28 of each strip set. So we're going to have 28 that have the 3 blue, 2 white, and then 28 with 3 white and 2 blue. Meet me back here when you get them cut. Okay, now you should have 28 of from each pieces from each of the strip sets, and you see how nice they fit together because we've pressed everything to the fabric eye. You should now be able to nest the seams and sew these together in pairs, and these will be the segments that go on our border. So let's do that, and then we're going to press this seam open just to make it easier to put the pieces next to each other. So 1/4 inch seam, make sure you nest everything well, and press this seam open. Okay, so here's all my checkerboard pieces together. Now we're going to take, and on 12 of them, we're going to sew fabric C rectangles to the side that has 3 fabric I. And this is very important, or otherwise you're going to mess up the whole design. So make sure that you sew the fabric C rectangles to the side that has 3 I fabrics. And there's going to be 12 fabric C rectangles. And while you're at it, on the other 16, you're going to sew fabric B rectangles, and that will be on the side that only has 2 fabric I. So it's the one that has 3 fabric A. So make sure you sew fabric C where you have 3 of fabric A, and you're going to sew fabric C where you have 3 of fabric I. So I'm going to do that, and we're going to press the seams on the fabric C pieces. We're going to press toward fabric C, but we're going to press away from fabric B. So on this one, we're going to press toward the checkerboard. And that's so we can nest the seams between the pieces as we assemble the borders. Okay, so I have all of my checkerboard border units made, and now I'm going to make 2 side borders. I'm going to do that by alternating these units, and remember we have 16 of this one and 12 of this. So we're going to take 4 of these, 3 of these, so 4 of fabric C, 3 of fabric B, alternate them to make 1 side border, and then we're going to do it again to make a second side border. So 4 of the fabric C, that's going to have your fabric A up here in this corner, and 3 of the fabric B that has the fabric I up in this corner. Alternate them and make 2 side borders. When you put them together, you're going to be able to nest this seam, and then you're going to want to make sure you match up the seam in the checkerboard portion where we pressed it open. You're going to make sure you line that up well and that you get this nested, and sew these together. Press the seam any way you like. I'll meet you back here when I have my 2 side borders pieced. Okay, so here you can see where I've seamed together the pieces to make my side border, and you have the nice checkerboard effect, but then you have the alternating fabrics in the outer edge. And I chose to press my seams open, but you can press them in any direction you'd like. Okay, now it's time to make our top and bottom borders, and now we're going to need 2 of our corner pieces. So we're going to do the same thing we did to make the side borders, in that we're going to alternate the fabric B and C checkerboard units. Again, we're going to have 4 of the fabric B and 3 of the fabric C, and then you're going to have the fabric C corner units that you're going to put on each end. Same way, as we put these together, we can nest the seams at the top. As long as we're putting the right pieces together, put the seams at the top, and then you need to make sure you match up the seams in the four-patch. Press the seams any way you want. I probably will also press these open, but you can press them any way that you'd like. I'll be back when I have these borders done. Okay, so here you see I've got my top and bottom border done with the corner piece added on, and I've matched up my seam, so I've got my nice checkerboard effect all the way across, and the outer piece, it alternates between fabrics B and C, with of course fabric C in our corner unit. Next up is to put these borders on. Well, we're going to put the side borders on first. Okay, it's now time to put on the borders that we made. So what I like to do is pin from the piece side, and I'll just start at one end, and I'll put a pin at the first seam is usually what I do. So get this nice and square at the end. Go over here to this first seam and I'll put a pin. And then I go to the very other end of the seam, trying to make sure I don't twist the strip. There we go. So I go to the other end of the seam and I do the same thing. Now I've measured the border to be the right size to fit based on the measurements of the quilt. So based on the should be measurements of the quilt, not what it actually is, but what I think it should be based on the pattern. So I've cut them to the, odd size because it's an on point setting. Okay, so after I've done the two ends, I stretch the quilt out and find the middle of the two sides. Now it's easy to find the middle because it's where this block is right here. So I'm going to put a pin right here. It's where the sashings come together, and we've got a half block on either side. So I'm going to put a pin here. Actually, I'm going to put a pin on this side of the intersection, just so I can, might as well pin a seam while I'm at it. Actually, I'm going to pin on, I'm going to be sewing in this direction. So actually, I think this would be the better side to pin because that's where there's a seam allowance that might flip up. And now I just continue doing that. I go from the middle point where I pinned to the end and even it out, and then find a place to pin. And I keep doing this halves and halves until I have about 4 or 5 inches between the pins. That one's a little bigger than 4 inches, but I think that'll be fine. And then I come over here, and again I'm going to pin. I think I'm going to put 2 pins. I think I'm going to put a pin right here. And I'm going to put another pin, right here. So I'm still at 4 to 5 inches, and I'm just pulling the quilt, so I'm making sure I'm nice and even everywhere I'm pinning. So I'm evening up the quilt versus the border. So here we are again on this, on the other side, and so I'll put a pin here. And I'll put 2 pins here. Now my border piece is underneath. I meant to lay it with the seam going the other way so I wouldn't be possibly flipping it up, so I'm going to pin right into the seam allowance that's underneath there. And I'll put a pin here. I got lots of pins, so this doesn't take very long. And let's see here. I'll put one here. And one here. Now, it's time to go over and stitch this on, and one thing I want you to notice, or remember, that is as we made this, when we trimmed the edges even at the last month, each one of these seam intersections should be 1/4 inch from the side. So as I stitch along here, I should be going through each one of those seam intersections so that my points should be nice on the other side when we press it out. So I'm going to go ahead and pin the other side border, and then I'm going to sew them, press them, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so we've got the side borders on. You can see I've got nice points on my squares because I sewed through those intersections. And now I'm going to do the same thing with putting on the top and bottom borders. I'm going to start at one end, start over here, start at one end, and now the first seam to pin, of course, is the seam from the border, it's side borders. And the other side. And notice when I'm doing these, I'm putting the piece thing on top so I can watch my seams and make sure I don't get any of them flipped up when I sew along. So I'm going to continue doing what I did before, where I find the middle, put a pin. Okay, so here's the middle. Put a pin, and so on until I get this side, this top or bottom border on. I'm going to do the other of the top and bottom border and sew them and press them, and I'll meet you back here so we can see how we finish off this quilt. Okay, so I've got this inner border on and I've got my seams pressed. So now we need to put on the piece borders that we made. So I'm going to do the same technique for applying the piece border that I did for putting on the inner border, the strip border. I'm going to put the pieced section on top, and again, pin at the beginning and the end, pin to the middle, and then keep having the distance until I have it all completely pinned. I'm going to do that for the two side borders and the top and bottom border, and I'll meet you back here when I have it all finished. One thing I want to note is that when we put this border on, we're going to press the seam toward the inner border. So it's going to be pressed this way, so it's toward the solid piece of fabric rather than the piece portions. So I'll meet you back here when I've got all the borders on. And here we have it. Cheshire Quilters Guild 2019 Block of the Months, Cat Den Mountain Quilts BOM. Here's my finished top. I hope you've enjoyed this block of the month, and I hope to see you back here in January for a 5-month mystery called Fractured Squares. So come back in January and we'll start a mystery together. But here finally is Cat Den Mountain Quilts BOM, Cheshire Quilters Guild 2019 Block of the Month.